Welcome! In this segment, you will see what is included in the box and what tools you will need to complete the assembly of the snow thrower. In the box, you should have one housing assembly, Part 1, one chute crank rod assembly, Part 2, one support tube crank rod, Part 3, one winch assembly, Part 4, one anti-rotation bracket, Part 5, two front pulley frame brackets, Part 6, two rear pulley frame brackets, Part 7, one 56-inch drive V-belt, Part 8, one 55-inch drive V-belt, Part 9, one auger V-belt attached to the housing assembly, Part 10, one clutch idler assembly, Part 11, one cable bracket, Part 12, one left-hand hanger bracket, Part 13, one right-hand hanger bracket, Part 14, one pulley, Part 15, one chute and control cable assembly, Part 16, one right-hand side plate, Part 17, one left-hand side plate, Part 18, one switch mounting assembly, Part 19, and one wire harness, Part 20. In the hardware packages, you should have the following items: one hex bolt, 3/8 inch by 3 1/4 inch, Part A, four hex bolts, 5/16 inch by 1 inch, Part B, four hex bolts, 5/16 inch by 3/4 inch, Part C, six hex bolts, 1/4 inch by 1 inch, Part D, two self-threading hex bolts, 5/16 inch by 3/4 inch, Part E, two shear bolts for spare parts, Part F, two hex head shoulder bolts, Part G, two round head shoulder bolts, Part H, six carriage bolts, 3/8 inch by 1 inch, Part I, two carriage bolts, 5/16 inch by 1 3/4 inch, Part J, two carriage bolts, 5/16 inch by 1 1/4 inch, Part K, four carriage bolts, 5/16 inch by 1 inch, Part L, one carriage bolt, 5/16 inch by 3/4 inch, Part M, one washer, 1/2 inch by 1 inch, Part N, seven washers, 1/4 inch, Part O, 19 washers, 5/16 inch with extra washers included, Part P, three washers, 3/8 inch standard, Part Q, four washers, 1/2 inch by 1 1/2 inch, Part R, two bowed washers, Part S, one lock washer, 3/8 inch, Part T, two hex lock nuts, 3/8 inch, Part U, 19 nylock nuts, 5/16 inch with two spare parts, Part V, 10 flange nuts, 3/8 inch, Part W, six flange nuts, 1/4 inch, Part X, one spring, Part Y, three chute keepers, Part Z, two hairpin cotters, 5/64 inch, Part AA, one hairpin cotter, 3/32 inch, Part BB, six hairpin cotters, Part CC, two lock pins, Part DD, two clevis pins, 1/2 inch by 7/8 inch, Part EE, one plastic cap, Part FF, one spacer, 1/4 inch, Part GG, one spacer, 3/8 inch, Part HH, two tensioning chains, Part II, two tail reflectors, Part JJ, 8 nylon ties, Part KK, and one cable clip, Part LL. Keep the assembly hardware in the packaging that they came in until each part is needed to keep them from getting lost or mixed together. You will need the following tools to complete the assembly: two 7/16 inch wrenches, two 1/2 inch wrenches, two 9/16 inch wrenches, two 3/4 inch wrenches, one screwdriver, and one knife. You will also need some general purpose grease for assembly. Take note that you will not need all of the hardware pieces for the snow thrower assembly and attachment to your tractor. Any unneeded hardware pieces may be discarded after the assembly is complete and you have checked that everything works properly. However, do not discard the 2 spare shear bolts, Part F, or any extra 5/16" nylock nuts, Part V. These should be kept for needed maintenance later. For additional or missing parts, please contact the manufacturer directly.